75,000 years ago, the apocalypse happened. The explosion of the Toba supercaldera worsened an existing ice age and sent the world into a 10-year winter. Over the whole Earth, roughly 10,000 Homo sapiens survived this winter. Every product of humanity that has been, is, or will be is thanks to these isolated, cold, hungry ancestors of ours who were lucky and clever enough to survive a decade of winter with stone tools. This is an illustration of the KT impact event that killed the dinosaurs. The odds of you or I getting killed by an asteroid like this is about the same as the odds of us dying in a plane crash. I mentioned the Toba explosion to point out the precedent for extinction events in our own history. Fortunately, there's no precedent for this type of extinction event. There are plenty of other existential threats that might kill us off. The point I'm trying to make is that we can't anticipate and stop everyone indefinitely. There's an actuarial accretion of risk. Eventually, one gets through. If we want to stick around as a species, we've got to do something. We've got all of our eggs in one basket right now. And there is one shining opportunity to get our collective eggs out of one basket. Mars. Everything you need for life you can find here. All the chemicals and all the resources necessary to support a technological civilization. There is no better second basket in the whole solar system. There are two hurdles to colonizing Mars, though. The first is Earth's gravity well. It's incredibly expensive to get off the Earth. The space shuttle costs around $11,000 a kilogram. The good news is that there's been some serious progress on this front. The private sector is bringing launch costs down significantly. This is one of the Falcon series of rockets from SpaceX, a company founded by one of the PayPal billionaires. Their goal is around $1,000 a kilo, and they're close to that mark now. So I focused my research on the other problem. What do you do when you get to Mars? The second reason that Mars would be expensive and dangerous to visit is that it is incredibly inhospitable. Temperatures fluctuate from 20 degrees to negative 170 degrees Celsius. It can literally snow carbon dioxide. There's nowhere near enough atmosphere to breathe, and what atmosphere there is, you don't want to breathe. The soil is oxidative and nitrogen poor, and there's constant hard solar radiation. Mars is the most hospitable place off of the Earth, but if you were unprepared for it, it would kill you in seconds. If you were prepared for it, you'd spend all of your time just trying to get the resources you need just to live and eat. Nitrogen, water, carbon, not to mention the harsher the environment is, the more infrastructure you have to bring to do that. The more you have to bring, the more expensive it is to go. If Mars is going to be a place where people are going to go to live, we need to make it a place that's better for life. Terraforming is the process of engineering a whole planetary environment into an Earth-like state. If Mars is too cold and its atmosphere too thin, why not warm it up and thicken its atmosphere? We've already proven we can do these things here on Earth. And like global warming, the underlying assumption of terraforming is a runaway greenhouse effect. If it gets warmed, trapped gases are released. The gases then trap more heat. The main difference between Earth and Mars is that warming on Mars increases its human carrying capacity instead of decreasing it. The key is getting Mars warm enough to start the chain reaction that leads to a stable homeostasis. A variety of ways to warm Mars have been proposed in the past. Increasing the insulation of the polar caps by covering them in a thin layer of black dust. Huge space mirrors to reflect extra sunlight back onto the surface. Hundreds of automated nuclear plants to manufacture greenhouse gases. My personal favorite, capturing asteroids made of water and methane and redirecting them to burn up in the Martian atmosphere. There's a problem here. It's not that these plans are technically impossible. In fact, these plans have very technically savvy proponents. But it's a classic failing of brilliant engineers to expect us to recognize brilliant engineering, and more importantly, to expect us to pay for brilliant engineering. Terraforming Mars using these methods represents cost and effort comparable to the construction of the pyramids. And I can understand why people who are affected by serious problems right now here on Earth could see such an investment as pure, unmitigated waste. Glory, exploration, and the future are all abstracts. Suffering is here and now. Which is how you end up with a Saturn V rusting in a warehouse in Florida for 40 years. Once a monument to human ingenuity, now a monument to our attention span. Such will be the fate of any space project that demands billions of tax dollars and sustained decades of work. Without an alternative people can and will pay for, our posterity will inherit museums full of unfulfilled promises. I have an alternative. To preface my alternative, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to Craig Ventnor. On the bottom right are two examples of his handiwork. These are bioengineered chassis ready to have a genome injected into them. They will then express that genome, a process very analogous to writing and running a program. This is only 15 years after the human genome was sequenced. I'm pointing out Mr. Ventnor's work to highlight what incredibly sophisticated control we have over living things and how fast that control is improving. This is Deinococcus radiodurans. It's a bacteria that thrives in a variety of extreme conditions: heat, cold, salt exposure, and amazing amounts of radiation. In fact, it's the most radio-resistant organism known. Most comprehensive terraforming proposals include a stage where you introduce basic organisms to help build an ecology which can contribute to a planetary homeostasis, just like life does here on Earth. But it's always been assumed that you would have to warm Mars first, then introduce life. And this is a valid assumption before the recent explosion in our ability to manipulate genes. But I believe that the more practical and vastly less expensive way of terraforming Mars starts with Deinococcus radiodurans. This organism is naturally very close to being able to survive on Mars. Using its survival capabilities as a starting point, we can engineer families of organisms designed to prepare Mars for human colonization. These microorganisms could darken Mars and produce a thicker atmosphere by generating greenhouse gases. They'd ready Martian soil for the introduction of lichens, fungi, and plants, forming the foundation of an ecology that could eventually support human civilization. There are four major benefits to this approach. Delivering your spores is as easy as running a swab over a lander that's already on its way. Bacteria aren't heavy. This is a huge cost that's completely avoided. NASA's aware of the possibility of microorganisms hitching a ride. While it would be extremely unlikely random bacteria could survive the trip, NASA's always been careful to sterilize its landers just in case what I'm proposing we do intentionally were to happen accidentally. There's no need for maintenance, no need for a manned presence to sustain it. We're talking about a process that at its fastest will take hundreds of years. Governments may come and go, public will may wax and wane, but once these bacteria are there, the process is in motion. Bacterial growth is exponential. It's likely that the harsh conditions of Mars, in particular the cold, will make that growth a very slow exponential, which gains momentum as Mars warms up. So the bacteria will work slowly on their own, and if any of the other projects I discussed ever do become practical, not only will they add heat in their intended way, but by doing so they'll quicken the bacterial growth, which will in turn produce its warming effects even faster. This creates a positive feedback loop that adds leverage to any subsequent attempt to add heat to Mars. If development costs as much as the Human Genome Project, it'll cost us about as much as 2 flights of the space shuttle. Not that bad. I'm developing a grant proposal based on this idea, which I hope to carry forward to grad school and get funded by NASA or the NSF. Once we can show that it can happen, we need to start talking about what ought to happen. The ethical and policy questions surrounding this issue are in many ways much more challenging than the science. And this conversation about what should occur and who should be responsible for it and who owns it, that conversation can't take place until the science has been done. Up to this point, I've talked about what I intend to do. I hope that I might have gotten you interested in trying to do something yourself. If you are, I really recommend that you get in touch with the Mars Society. I certainly wouldn't be here talking to you about this if it wasn't for them. Thanks a lot for listening, and I really look forward to hearing any feedback you guys might have.